Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video we will be covering the importance of lower limb stiffness for sprint performance. Before we can explore how stiffness may influence sprint performance, we first need to understand what stiffness is. Stiffness refers to the ability to resist joint movement against force. So essentially, stiffness is the ability to maintain a rigid joint position when an external force is trying to move the joint. So how is stiffness related to sprint performance? During sprinting, the legs move in a cyclical motion throughout each stride. However, during ground contact, we want the joints to remain rigid for maximum propulsion. If we have a look at these two examples of the legs during ground contact, we can see that on the left-hand side, there is less change in joint angle, while on the right-hand side, there is a more significant change in the joint angles of the hip, knee, and ankle. So essentially, the athlete on the right has collapsed under the forces of sprinting, while the athlete on the left is able to maintain rigid joints. Higher stiffness benefits sprint performance in two primary ways. The first is through force leaks. By allowing joint movement, the downward force dissipates through the collapse of the joints. This means that there is less ground reaction forces to propel the athlete forward. To demonstrate this point, let's use an example of a basketball. If we drop a fully inflated basketball onto concrete, it bounces back fairly high. However, if we partially deflate the basketball and drop it from the same height, it doesn't bounce as high because there is more force lost through the distortion of the basketball as it hits the ground. So if we strike the ground with softer joints, we lose some of the force through that joint movement. The second reason that higher stiffness can benefit sprint performance is due to its enhancement of the stretch shortening cycle. By striking the ground with high stiffness, the muscles act almost isometrically. This means that the tendons undergo a larger stretch and therefore a more forceful recoil. So we are getting a more efficient use of the elastic tendons to help propel the athlete forward. The stiffness requirements are slightly different between the acceleration phase and max velocity sprinting. During acceleration sprinting, the foot strikes the ground with a deeper hip and knee angle and requires the muscles to act concentrically to extend these joints and propel the athlete forward. Therefore, we don't actually need high joint stiffness from the hip and knee. However, we do want the foot and ankle to remain rigid, as this is where all the force produced by the hip and knee gets transferred into the ground. During max velocity sprinting, the joint angles during ground contact are different. The hip and knee are both in near full extension, while the ankle is in slight plantar flexion. During this phase of sprinting, we want all three joints to remain rigid during ground contact. So how can we train joint stiffness to transfer to sprint performance? There are three primary methods that can be implemented. The first method is sprinting itself. Sprinting is the most specific form of training to improve speed, so it needs to be practiced regularly. Whatever supplementary training methods are used to enhance stiffness, sprinting must still be included for the training to transfer to performance. The second method is using plyometric training. Plyometric training refers to exercises which involve short ground contact times and have a high reliance on the stretch shortening cycle. Plyometric training requires the joints to be rigid during ground contact and the elastic properties to propel the athlete. Athletes should gradually try to increase the amount of force that can be resisted while maintaining short ground contact times. For example, athletes can perform drop jumps with increasing height over time or wearing a weight vest. This will increase the amount of downward force that is trying to displace the joints. If an athlete can minimize ground contact time with higher forces, then they are training the joints to remain stiffer under high loads. And the last training method to increase joint stiffness for sprinting is isometric strength training. Isometric strength training refers to holding certain joint positions with maximal loads for 3 to 10 seconds. Isometric strength training should be used at sprint-specific joint angles for the ankle, knee, and hip, as these joints are the ones that require high stiffness during sprinting. Isometric strength training can increase the absolute force that can be produced in an isometric manner for the relevant muscles. If an athlete becomes isometrically stronger, they can resist more force before the joint moves. Therefore, they should be able to maintain a higher stiffness during sprinting. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.